Good morning. I am Vasil Garanizov, Associate Professor from New Bulgarian University. I have the honor and pleasure to open and monitor this forum discussion on the results of the fifth wave of the European Values Study. Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Constitutional Judge, Your Eminencies, colleagues from the universities of Sofia, ladies and gentlemen, journalists. I give the floor to the rector of New Bulgarian University, Professor Dr. Plamen Bochkov. Welcome to you all, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests and colleagues. New Bulgarian University is a full member of the consortium of universities and research centers in 47 European countries, included in the fifth wave of EVS. The honorary professor of New Bulgarian University, Georgy Fotev, is one of the leaders of this mega project. At New Bulgarian University, there is a site, Atlas of European Values, in which are published the data from previous waves. When the present wave is completed in all countries, the data will be published on this site to be used by teachers and students in all Bulgarian universities, as by all who are interested in the data. I thank the outstanding experts from Sofia University who have had a key part in this forum. I thank also Alpha Research and Madam Boriana Ditrova for the excellent cooperation we have had in implementing this study. I wish you a pleasant forum presenting the results. Thank you. We, Europeans, are confronted with the need for strategic debate on European values. Every national society that is part of the European Union and the community as a whole is confronted with this need. Today's forum aims to provoke the start of such a debate in our country. Today we have at our disposal a large mass of data from the fifth wave EVS for Bulgaria. By the end of this year, we will have the data from all 47 European countries. Every European country, and especially members of the European Union, is a carrier of European values and is responsible for those values. In our time, there is a crisis of European values. But let us recall that the great achievements of Europe and of European mankind are the result of overcome resolved crises of values. The face, identity of Europe is defined by European values. This face changes because the constellation of European values also changes. There is room for concern and there is room for new hopes. What is necessary is willpower, reason, and faith in the mission of Europe, which has proclaimed man as supreme value. Values relate people and divide them. Some grow weaker in the course of history, others grow stronger. Attachment to certain values provoke latent or evident tensions and conflicts between people, nations, social groups, communities, between national societies. The thematic circle of EVS is all-encompassing, and such will be the strategic public debate as well, which we're starting now. We are interested in the everyday life of people, in the family, work, religion, politics, society. Outstanding analyzers and commentators will present to you, based on empirical data from the fifth wave for Bulgarian society, will present to you their conclusions, theses, problems of related to values. What is necessary is a serious and sharp view at the requirements of the day. What is necessary is to cope with insecurity, which lurks everywhere. The motto of the European Union holds the secret of the inexhaustible potential of the Union. I think this secret is related to values. Unity in diversity is a permanent and fundamental European value which began with the creation of the European Union. Unity does not come at the cost of diversity, nor is diversity a disregard for unity. Our society is indubitably a carrier of fundamental European values, and its European orientation is unconditional. But that is how things are when we have the privilege to be masters of our destinies. And one may expect solidarity if one gives solidarity in return. Solidarity is a fundamental social value, very characteristic for the constellation of European values. I give the floor to Associate Professor Boriana Dimitrova, Director of Alpha Research, our partner in the study, and leader of the empirical part of the study. Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear Program Director, Professor Fotev, for me it is an exceptional honor and pleasure to present to you before this public the first analyses of the Bulgarian part of the European Value Study Project. I will say a few words about the nature of the survey. Alpha Research was chosen together with 40 other agencies to implement the collection and processing of information from this large European project in the field of social sciences. The whole team was very motivated, well organized, and we very rigidly followed the strict methodology for shaping the sample, surveying, and protection of personal data. We were able to finish among the first group of countries, and we were able to pass all the tests of external evaluation under the leadership of one of the great authoritative figures in this. Only after passing through such an evaluation do the national unit teams have the right to disseminate the data, as we are doing today. Today, studies of public opinion are numerous. We can read all sorts of things every day. How many people go to extra census, how their attitude to the euro, at what age they begin to live independently. The super production of surveys, together with the shortened temporal horizon, confuse the overall picture, adumbrate the tendencies that appear in Bulgarian European societies. And it is precisely the trends and their understanding that presents the value and unique quality of this project. It is done under a united methodology every 10 years and enables us to do dynamic and comparative analyses, correlations, to study the short, middle, and long waves of public social development. Allows us to see the details without losing sight of the... This is the moment when my function is exhausted and I remain as a commentator. I give the microphone to Professor Fotev. The presentation is organized around thematic circles regarding the data. The first such is personality and life. I give the floor to Associate Professor Antony Golubov to comment on part of the questions. Това беше.
You understand that the comments will be accompanied by projecting of graphs. Please show the first graph. Thank you. Good day from me. There are some new values presented here compared with... They give a three-dimensional perspective in which we see a growth, or at least stabilization, of the value of work and stabilizing of values concerning politics and of the value of leisure time. In the previous, Bulgaria was one of the countries with the highest values for the highest perception of the value of work. But work seen not as labor, not as duty to society, but as personal security. Most important is the only 1/3 of these surveyed people, only 1/3 of these surveyed persons feel that work is a duty to others. We have a similar tendency in the attitude to politics, a small growth from a very low value, but politics perceived as something done by politicians is perceived as something external and remote. An expansion of the importance of leisure time, this perceptible growth of the value of leisure time reflects the distance between that which is perceived as public and that which is conceived as personal. I give the floor to Professor Hristo Todorov. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. The commentary on the data connected with the questions about the experience of happy. There is a tendency of talking about how Bulgarians feel is in a minor key. The cliche is that the Bulgarians are the poorest, sickest, unhappiest, saddest. This is corresponds to a Bulgarian inclination to complain, but it corresponds to a newer understanding, more recent understanding that the position of the victim has high chances to be to be rewarded by the media, by society. You win by presenting yourself as a victim. You win a pure, clear conscience, and you win at times some economic advantages. The data, however, do not confirm the idea that the Bulgarians are extremely pessimistic. Compared with the survey from 10 years ago, the share of people in the positive range has perceptibly increased, and that of the people in the negative range has decreased. The share of those who feel their lives are rather happy than unhappy is considerably larger than three simple correlations. Young people give a more positive assessment of their lives than the more older people. This has been the situation for ages. Second, the better educated feel happier than the less educated. Evidently, the life of the educated person is richer in opportunities. Third, people with children feel happier than those without children. Obviously, children add meaning to a person's life. My conclusion: in today's Bulgaria, the difficulties of life, though considerable, are not unbearable. Most modern Bulgarians have the strength and courage to fight, to deal with them successfully, and to lead a meaningful life. Thank you. Associate Professor Harlan Alexandrov has given his commentary in written text. You can read it. He is absent, not in Bulgaria. I give the next circle of questions is trust in institutions. I give the floor to Associate Professor Ognian Minchev. Good day. Trust in institutions is the most important indicator of the maturity of a democracy. Democratic representation is typical only for societies with a modern civil culture. In immature, unmodernized societies, they are in a reverse proportion. In democracies without rule of law, such as many post-communist countries in the margin of Europe, in reverse, leaders of authoritarian regimes often accuse democracy of their inability to manage effectively and try to limit democracy in order to increase the effectiveness of the institutions. When we compare the data from 2008 and 2018, we see the moderate but positive tendencies in a better combination of democratic representation with institutional effectivity. Except for the negative attitude to the judicial system and partially to the parliament, Bulgarian citizens have changed their attitude to institutions in two dimensions. First, in the last 10 years, he has moderately increased his trust in public institutions. Second, his opinion has shifted to more extreme positive or negative, to more moderate options for evaluation, partially, somewhat approve. In the last 10 years, the Bulgarian citizens have definitely increased their trust in the democracy as a system. Democracy is considered good by 53% of citizens, while 10 years ago it was only 26%. The pride of being a Bulgarian citizen has risen. Only 16% are not proud. Comparatively, in the last 10 years, trust in public institutions has increased moderately, with the exceptions which I mentioned. I think this assessment of public opinion is a credit that commits the leaders and institutions to fulfill it, make it real. I give the floor to Professor Lyudmil Georgiev. A few more words about public administration. The increase of trust in public administration is due to, above all, from the entry of younger people, better educated in this sphere, and the greater transparency in the activity, thanks to electronization. The basis of administration has received greater European regulation. The fact that trust has increased a little does not mean we approach the average values of trust. In Bulgaria, it is twice less than the average for the European Union, 24 compared to 48. Trust in the police is rather emotional in nature, because statistics about crimes shows that the detection of crimes sharply falls with the rise of the crime rate, which shows a lack of capacity in the police organs. Many crimes are not registered, including thefts, rapes, and kidnapping for ransom. And the fact that the press is approaching, the press receives part of the negative opinion of the political class. Trust in the trade unions has increased thanks to the acute conflicts between employers and workers, which involves greater activity of trade unions. Yet their role tends to decrease because of the digitalization of work, the increasing number of merchants and family businesses. Trust in the social security system has increased as an element of more intense competition. It is reasonable that people will not trust others in the social media. The large social security systems created the hopes that unemployment can be compensated for. There is a strong polarity between sick people who attract money through SMS in order to get treatment abroad, and most doctors go abroad. We have a shortage of 30,000 nurses in Bulgaria. On the other hand, the entry of the new technology created much greater hopes for diagnostics, the effectiveness of results, the easier placing of diagnoses, which increases trust. The increased trust in large companies is connected with their larger size, better social policy for their workers, and a greater number of offered social services. The decreased trust in the judicial system is rather a frozen level of trust rather than an increase. This low trust is due to constant changes in legislation, lack of understanding of the complexity of the judicial system, and the possibility that their acts are due to ambiguous interpretations. We pass to the next extremely important circle of topics, questions related to democracy. You see on the screen, you see a graph. Here we have 3 outstanding experts who will comment. I give the floor to Associate Professor Tatiana Burudzieva. Dear Professor Fotev, dear guests, journalists, colleagues, you see here only the data for the direct question. My colleagues and I have seen a larger amount of data. My conviction is that about democracy, one should either speak very briefly or talk all the time. I will be very brief. We have 3 good news and 3 not very good news. The conviction that people are controlling their lives and have a freedom of choice is a good choice. The supporters of basic value, the respect for law, the number of people who feel this is growing. Twice double growth of people who believe democracy is a very good system. At the same time, trust in media is at the level of trust in parliament. And only parties have such low levels of trust. Why? There is a long explanation. Passing from emotion to rationality is very difficult in Bulgaria. Only 2% of people, there's been only a 2% decrease of the people who want a strong hand, a leader who will lead without dealing with elections. But 60% think the opposite. Who will take responsible decisions in Bulgaria? 81 of Bulgarians feel that not the government, but experts should make these decisions, which shows a very great confusion about what a democracy is. This is an important task for intellectuals who take part in public forums, and especially for the media. For Bulgarians, democracy is well liked, but not in rationalized, understood value. It is a fairy tale in which of whose happy ending we believe, but we don't know which characters we are playing in it. I give the floor to Professor Evgeny Dainov. The data tell me about the concept of open society, which we have not been using recently, and this says a lot about what times we are living in. About the kind of communities. People are people who live in groups. In closed societies live people who think that groups are natural: family, clan, ethnicity. In open societies, individuals create all sorts of groups. They go in, they go out. Regarding these communities, I see some optimistic news in these data over the last 10 years. The small number of people who live in an open society is still a minority, but has increased. Sometimes 2 or 3 times in the last 10 years has grown the number of people who create communities typical of open society. These communities that are being created are created by autonomous individuals who feel they are the authors of their lives. I saw the data. If we group them, 40% of the people felt they controlled their lives 10 years ago. Today, they're more than 50%. And finally, in open society, people take part actively as citizens for the public good. We see a considerable growth in the minority that is inclined to take part in environment protection, signing petitions, etc. And talking about leisure time, and a very important indicator of whether a society values leisure time. In some closed societies, people do not even have idea of leisure time. The rise of leisure time, the value of leisure time, shows that despite the very strong pressure for society to enter a closed format, many people are still living in open society. The conclusion is that if someday a government appears in Bulgaria that wants not to close society but to continue the course towards an open society, they have somewhat to rely on. They have a ground for their efforts. I have the pleasure to give the floor to Associate Professor Daniel Smilov. Thank you. I will go outside this scenario and commend the colleagues from NBU and Alpha Research for their perfectly completed work. Our team is one of the first who have completed its work and has publicized its data, which shows a great ability to compete in the European environment. Regarding the data on democracy, it is very important to read them against the general backdrop of the study. This general backdrop of growth of the number of people who feel rather happy, the decrease of people who feel discontented. These changes are not drastic, but they are considerable, significant. Modern specialists, scholars show that the political attitudes to parties is very easily influenced by backdrop expectations. Since we have a positive shift of the general background, no wonder that the attitude to democracy is the attitudes to democracy are positive. There is a considerable consolidation of the democratic views of citizens compared with 10 years ago. 10 years ago, 60% valued assessed democracy as a very good or quite good form of government. Today, there are more than 82% of the respondents. Those who feel democracy is bad has drastically decreased from 16 to 6%. Hence, we can say that democracy has been consolidated at the level of public attitudes and has become what specialists call the only game in town. Familiar phrase. Such a familiar positive change is that Bulgarians understand democracy more and more. They insist that an important part of democracy is free elections, human rights, and equality between men and women. These are points of agreement in Bulgarian society. But as Georgy said, although democracy is well trusted, the trust in key institutions is very low. Party, parliament, government. We have no very important dynamics compared with 10 years ago. Bulgaria is part of the picture which is common to all of Europe, low trust in representative institutions, parties, and parliament. To this, we should add the problem mentioned before, very important. There is still a strong attitude to experiment with strong leaders or experts. This shows that though democracy is consolidated as a system of governance, the institutions of democracy, and specifically parties, have not become institutionalized. And we have, in fact, a consolidated but volatile democracy with a desire of people to experiment, which leads to frequent elections, political concussions, waves of protests, and a general volatility of the political environment. This is my general assessment. There are many interesting details we can comment on. For instance, compared with 10 years ago, it seems the centrists have melted away. Most people have gone to the right, some to the left. There is a stronger polarization. I don't think this is a deep ideological change in people. It reflects the fact that NDSV has disappeared, and the party GERB has positioned itself in the at the right. Thank you. Now we have a change of people at the. Before giving the floor to our next speaker, Docent Smilov pointed out that Bulgaria is among the 10 excellent scorers on this great project. Due to financial reasons, we started very late, but we finished at the head of the group, and these few countries, the coordinators of the whole project, they say that they are going, on the basis of our experience, write a handbook for the other countries that cannot cope with the very complicated requirements for this survey. I want to tell to the journalists that you have data about that are reliable and representative, and we have confirmation of this. There is nothing here due to nothing involving doubts about the reliability of the data. The very stringent requirements explains why many countries have not been able to cope. And this is our ambition. We don't want to be in the last place. As St. Smilov said, we've shown that we can be among the good ones. I give the floor to Professor Mizov in connection with the topic of the family. Going straight into the deep waters, the family is a super value for Bulgarian society. A very small number of people point out that it is unimportant or little important. There is agreement, full agreement on this issue, which in turn is important for a society that has multiple values and often torn by conflicts. Regarding the value of the family, there is almost no significant difference between groups based on gender, income, age. There was a hypothesis that younger people who marry at a later age create new forms of cohabitation without marriage, that these young people will show a lesser attraction for the family life. But no, they are in no way different in numbers from their parents and grandparents. So on the one hand, we have the family as a very important value. On the other hand, we have new trends that have come advanced related to the forms of marriage, attitude to children outside of wedlock, attitude to abortion, divorce. And here we see a kind of time bomb. These excessive importance of these values exert a very strong pressure on the individual to find his happiness, satisfaction in the family. But in fact, there is a competition between brothers and sisters. There is forms of dissatisfaction within the family. But if anything, there is anything to connect, unite us, it is the family, and this is a good basis for identity policies, demographic policies. Thank you. I give the floor to Antony Golubov. Thank you. Second after work, the family is the fundamental value in the surveys in 2008 and now. There are two groups of values that are due to citizenship, but there are values that are valued because they are lacking. My thesis is that the great importance of family is such a value. There is a monolithic support that the family is important, but on the other hand, we have a fragmented social reality in which the family seems like an ideal environment where you can find a balance between collective and individualistic values. The different perspectives towards and expectations from the family make it a place of conflict, desired, but built in different ways. Thank you. The next circle of topics is very important. Socialization, education, and education. I give the floor to Professor Dimitar Vatsov. Thank you. I am reading the data from this very large study, and I see this as the result of two vectors influencing public opinion. One vector is the long-term growing self-confidence of Bulgarians as a result of the normalization of relations in society. The other vector influencing is the aggressive political populism and anti-liberal media propaganda in recent years. In this light, I read the data about education of children. The attitude to education of children and education follows the general tendency of growing self-confidence and more pragmatic attitude to life. Today, more people feel that they are happy and value their leisure time and their work, and they translate this to the raising of their children. The most important values are hard work, which has grown compared with 10 years ago. The growth of the importance, a decrease in the value of imagination and thrift, increasing prosperity in the last 10 years, and there has been a shift from saving to a more pragmatic attitude. Imagination is not so important as to arrange your house. There's a sharp decrease in support for unselfishness, altruism. The insecurity of international relations and populist propaganda in the media, which is constantly subverting the ideas of universal values, meta-values, partially subverting the belief in democracy. Trust in the education system shows a growing attitude, pragmatic attitudes. Extreme mistrust has decreased, and more moderate forms of trust and distrust have grown. I give the word to Professor Alexander Kyosov. Thank you. I want to greet the Bulgarian team of this large study. It is interesting that the study has had 5 waves. This is a longitudinal perspective that can capture fast and slow processes. I would say that longitudinal studies have one shortcoming. Their agenda They're a little lumbersome, clumsy. They don't include new, unexpected processes that have started to influence societies in Europe. That is, I think, not enough questions have been included related to the digital revolution, social networks, information balloons, hybrid propaganda, and life in post-truth. This is absent from the study, and I am trying to compensate for this in my interpretation. I'm reading about the state of society in terms of the education values. From 2008, from 2018, there's been a slowly increasing importance of personal tasks in a human environment. The indicators for the importance of work, leisure time, family, paternalistic values such as fidelity and children. The increasing importance of friends and close people, a slow increase of indicators of satisfaction and happiness. There is a persistently low level of trust in politics and a traditionally very low level of trust in the democratic institutions, the judicial system, healthcare system, education system. Adding to this is the low desire for political activity, low willingness to take part in civic action. Only 8% of citizens say that they would take part in legal forms of protest. All this shows a slow process of breakdown of sociality. Bulgarian population is moving from modern social connections to immediate, particular virtues, moving from an imaginary community to direct face-to-face warm communities that are fragmented. They value what is visible and close, immediately can be touched, the immediate experience of the people. Values and that are at a hands away. But there is also a contrary tendency that seems to contradict this. An increase of proud patriotism, values that should unite the nation. A very impressive number of Bulgarians who feel very proud that they are Bulgarians, not that they are Bulgarian citizens, but that they are Bulgarians. This is accompanied with the growing xenophobia, a feeling of deficit of taking participation in government, and the desire for a strong leader. We suspect that this proud nationalism is a mediatic national populism. Now we come to the values of education. Which values should children teach their? They show a serious. The data show a serious decrease of the desire of parents to inspire in their children the value of unselfishness. 10 years ago, it was 31.4. Now it is 14.4. 20 percentage points decrease. The importance of imagination is no longer valued by parents, falling by 4 percentage points. Unlike these abstract values, the indicators for the immediate paternalistic virtues that are valued in the small, visible community. More parents want their children to have not imagination, but hard work, persistence, responsibility. The big picture supports the hypothesis that the Bulgarian society is losing its feeling for values for distant social connections that demand a cohesion of the entire society. Altruism and imagination are important, and their decrease is not harmless. They are the glue of modern societies, creating solidarity and identity and social cohesion. But as they say, this is only a trend. My views are only a hypothesis. Maybe the next studies will refute it, and perhaps the ship is sinking so slowly that we don't notice it. In this thematic circle, I give the word to Professor Rosen Stoyanov. Dear Mr. President, Mr. Rector, Professor Fotev, leisure time is integrated and digital. It is a consumer's time, but it also consumes parts of our everyday life. The share of daily existence in the digital space is increasing, surrounded by friends in quotation marks, people he does not know personally or hardly knows. This is a special parental priority to encourage, stimulate children to be hardworking rather than the increase of good manners is growing, but imagination is decreasing, independence is decreasing, initiative is the trust in the education system is catastrophically low. The mistrust in the social media I see as a critical thought and digital experience. The social media are not perceived as a source of information for political topics, which I see as something good. Now we go into the themes of competition and inequality. I give the floor to Professor Krasenstanchev. Welcome to all. It is my honor for me to have such a public. What I should comment is perhaps the most amusing part of the results. The results that you see are a continuation of what the colleagues said about happiness, open society, the state of democracy and trust in the state, etc. I will not comment on the various cross-tabulations. The situation is indeed very interesting. I suppose you can see the cross-tabulations by yourselves. So I would like to give some conclusions and compare the results with the statistics. The two conclusions, three conclusions. One conclusion, first, liberalization and competition, international integration, privatization are a left-wing idea. They give a good result for those who have smaller property, less chances in life, and who are younger. In a situation where the whole political system and redistribution through the budget is usually defends those who are older. At microeconomic level, this is explainable. This is so because competition increases the quality, decreases prices, and creates incentives for innovations. The statistics shows us that inequalities are, to some point in the last 10 years, have increased, in some cases decrease. The so-called curve of Kuznets, when a society grows richer, inequalities increase, and then at a certain point they become equal. The second thing I think is very important, which stems from statistics, For Bulgaria, these results are extremely important due to a simple historical. In the northern hemisphere, there is no such country as Bulgaria, in which from 1945 to 95, a constant increase of the value of the influence of the state. There is no such other country in the world that has been able to go bankrupt 7 times in 1 century. What the data show is that people have taken into account this experience, and the supposed, I don't see Rumen Avramov here, the so-called genetically included trust, the respect for the big, strong government, the important bosses who are constantly redistributing the privileges of people. The respect is not very big, in fact, and the situation is better than in other European countries. I give the floor to Professor Antoni Todorov. Thank you. And in the presentation, the text is very brief, consists only of 2 sentences, but I will try to unfold them. Yes, I'm watching out for the time. Looking at the data, I reached the conclusion that talking about equality and inequality. Equality is an important value in all societies, as is freedom. The fact that we live together is based on these values that you recognize as our others. Equality and freedom go hand in hand. In our society, I found a very contradictory understanding of inequality. On the one hand, there is a question that has not been put in the slides. They are asked more whether they prefer greater equality in income, or that the individual contribution should be rewarded. There is a shift in the last 10 years towards more equality of income. On the other hand, however, when the people are asked about competition and whether the state should take care that the equality income should be equal, on the contrary, there is a shift towards the opinion that the state should stay aside. It's not its business, and towards the value for competition. Competition is seen as positive if it's limited to the economy, if it's limited to prices and quality. But if competition goes outside the market and envelops the whole society, it risks destroying society, because living together is based not on the fact that we are rivals. There is competition in nature. They call it natural selection. Society is the opposite. It overcomes. When we talk about the value of competition, it is even a super value. Looking at the data, it seems we have not done our work as intellectuals. We have not explained to people that competition is good in the sphere of the market and is destructive outside the sphere of the market. But this is connected with something bigger. Market values have enveloped our society, but they go hand in hand with the expectation for greater equality. How can they be combined? The market naturally engenders inequalities. Who will be the actor of these inequalities? There is a complex relation between market and state in a democratic society. And democracy is a political regime based on the idea of deep equality. They drew lots in ancient Athens, showing that anyone can be a citizen. It would not be bad to return to democracy as fundamentally based on equality and on the understanding that inequalities subvert democracy. I'm talking about social inequalities. The next thematic circle is national and European affiliation. I give the word to Rumiana Kularova. First, I thank you for the opportunity that this excellent database, and I should say that when we interpret it, of course, we use another database, Eurobarometer. Many of these questions and the comparisons between the 10 years ago and now can be interpreted in view of the dynamics based on these same topics, which are registered twice a year of European Eurobarometer. The database of Eurobarometer is an exceptional instrument for us political scientists, and it should be so for politicians as well. What these data show us is that, in fact, as part of the European Union, Bulgarians perceive European models of rule of law and way of life. They assimilate it much more quickly than the pace of change of institutions in Bulgaria. This determines the lower trust in Bulgarian institutions of people. Here I can say that the mismatch between expectations and attitudes of people with what the institutions are giving them can be seen very clearly in the data. The rule of law increases the growing for 80% of the people. The law should always be obeyed, regardless of what kind of law. All sorts of laws, any kind of law should be obeyed. This is an exceptionally big change in the attitudes of people. They do not any longer want to ride for free in buses against social benefits that are received without reason. But the judicial system cannot punish the violators of laws. That is why the trust in the judicial system has decreased. The trust in them. There's the biggest decrease in trust is in the judicial system. Interpreting the feeling of closeness to Europe and European identity, we compare 2008 and last year. I look at the electorates, voters of the parties, the two parties in which the European identity is critically low, more than 10% lower. These two parties are БСП and ДПС, whereas the two ruling parties, it is 10% above the average. In other words, in the parliament, we have two parties for the voters of whom, I stress, the European identity is leading, and two parties in which non-European identity is dominant. Another important thing, there is something paradoxical. The most cosmopolitan party is the voters of the United Patriots. For them, the feeling of closeness to the world is much bigger than the average. It is also very important, paradoxically. These data are exceptionally interesting. There is a discrepancy between the political messages of the parties and the attitudes of their voters. Explains the instability of the political party system and their low trust. As for the European values related to the Protestant ethics, the value of work, it is important to say that for the two ruling parties, for both, the attitude to work is 15% higher than the average. For the two oppositionary parties, the attitude to religion is 15% higher. We have an opposition that is pro-religious, БСП and ДПС, and the rulers who are ruling party who are oriented to work. БСП is different from all other voters, that they are the unhappiest. The feeling of happiness is 15% lower. I should emphasize that the pride in being Bulgarian is not related to a party, and fear of immigrants is not distinctive for any party. They are common to all. If there is some particularity, this is the fear of new values, remoteness, distance from unfamiliar people. The most radical party in this respect is БСП. I should stress also that the attitude to talking about European identity, the attitude to our neighbors, there is a strong correlation between the approval of a positive attitude to correlation between a positive attitude to the European Union and the Balkan neighboring countries. I give the word to Milena Stefanova, associate professor, I will shorten much of what I was going to say, but I can always add to it. I read the data about European affiliation in terms of two trends. One trend is the trust limited to the family, which is dangerous, leading to atomization of society, and the other trend, increasing pragmatism of Bulgarians in the last 10 years. The crossing point of these two keys for interpreting the data show me that, in fact, Bulgarians feel that very strongly they are Bulgarians and Europeans. But does that mean they should be proud and remain enclosed in my own values, in the family, enclosed in a small circle of friends? We can talk a lot about this, and there will be occasions to talk in the future, especially when the other data for the other countries come out and compare ourselves with the others. But there is a positive trend, which I have pointed out. This trend is due to the pragmatic that we have gotten used to in a free world, where the competent people are those who survive, those who are able to compete. It is connected to the fact that the basic goal of the state 10 years ago and now has always been high economic growth. But more people, there are a growing number of respondents see this as the most important function of the state, and this should be said clear to all political leaders. In second place is the desire of people, the opinion that our opinion should be taken into consideration. We should have greater say. This is also very positive and shows that people feel cut off from the institutions, and that is why we have such a low trust in the institutions, even though there is a slight growth, as Minchev said. This is still a very low level. I thank you for the... Thank you. I give the floor to Professor Mikhail Nedelchev. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Fotev. Since the data we have are very eloquent, I will emphasize something that I think important for Bulgarian cultural identity and even painful. Bulgarian culture continues to be centered on literature. Its foundations are based on words, written texts. This is its power, but it's also its limitation. The Bulgarian state should initiate programs, as in France and Norway, and in Hungary and Poland, and even in Macedonia. Programs we should all support consistently. A document created by Professor Kiosev, which has its supporters, in which it is very strongly said that Bulgarian culture continues to be underfinanced, dramatically underfinanced. Bulgarian identity of Bulgarian culture is not self-evident for Europeans. The fact that the Cyril and Methodius, their work is at the foundation of the pluralism of the Europe of the nations, and this has developed over the centuries. This fact has been forgotten and not asserted. Not everywhere do people know why they were declared co-patrons, saints of Europe, and we need consistent policies to reassert Bulgarian culture and Bulgarian cultural identity as one of the classical European cultures. Perhaps we will stop the social hysteria of our Bulgarians who are leaving us and don't want to give a Bulgarian identity, but very hardly attain any kind of identity there where they are going. And now in two brief comments. One of the most interesting, and you should think about it, I give the word to Ognan Minchev on the topic, the neighbors of Bulgaria. The answers of the questions about the neighboring countries are impressive. Support for the membership is between 50 for Albania, 58 for Albania, and 75 for Macedonia. Even more impressive is the support of Bulgarian citizens for good neighborly relations with neighboring countries, between 90% for Romania and 64% for Turkey. Categorically support good neighborly relations as a basis for relations with our neighbors. This result indicates the possibility for a long-expected de-Balkanization of relations in our region, especially if it is shared by the public opinion in neighboring countries. I give the floor to Associate Professor Momchil Dojchev. This is a remarkable study which shows over 80% of adult citizens in Bulgaria today have a very positive attitude to the neighboring Balkan countries, including support for their membership in the European Union. This is a phenomenal change compared with the historical past of the region, which was characterized by very strong negative attitudes and mutual mistrust. This positive change expresses European trend in Bulgaria compared. There is no trace of the gloomy past of Balkanization in Bulgarian society today. We are reaching the end. I give the floor to Associate Professor Borjana Dimitrova, who will give a wide, broad view of in the division of labor between us commentators. I have the honor and the difficult task to make an overview of the whole mass of data from 1990 till today. In this sense, I will now talk about any area of topics. I will not use graphs. I will try to highlight the places where there has been strong changes in Bulgarian society in the long range, 30 years since 1990, and the shorter comparison, the last 10 years, 2008 to 2018. Inevitably, there is a risk that I will repeat some of what my colleagues said, expand some points. I have chosen these two perspectives, the 10-year comparison and the 30-year comparison. The data are very interesting, at times paradoxical. The paradox can be explained for two reasons. One is the social currents and processes. The other source may be statistical, where the groups are very small. There may be great shifts that are not due to social processes, but to small statistical groups. Societies are not frozen. The change of values is very characteristic of European civilization as an innovational change, but also as a return to common roots. The biggest change compared with the first wave is the change in the attitude to religion. 25 to 30% of Bulgarians said they were believers, and 2/3 were categorical that they do not believe, and religion has no place in their life. Today, the situation is radically changed. Instead of 25% religious, we have 65% who claim that they are various degrees of religiousness. Of course, I know we can talk about the specificity of Bulgarian religiousness, but there are several trends that are very obvious. Indifferent, aggressive attitude to religion, typical of communism, is now changing a view that seeks to understand life beyond consumerism. People are trying to find support in traditional Christian affiliation. The process of desecularization is complicated, and complicated in the moral aspect. With respect to attitudes towards which the church has a very negative attitude, divorce, homosexuality, abortion, today Bulgarian society does not follow the prescriptions and is more tolerant than in 1991. the rejection of abortion from 25 to 20%, rejection of divorce from 29 to 13, against homosexualism from 80 to 57. Thus, desecularization is not combined with degradation of important liberal values. It is rather a return to traditional symbolic events, and especially to the family. Regarding the institutions, I will say that every age of dense transformation subverts the institution, leadership, and the cohesion of societies. We witness these processes in Bulgaria as well. The important conclusion from this survey is that they have not subverted the trust in democracy as a foundation of European societies. While in the beginning of the transition, the crisis of every political power was seen as a crisis of the whole democratic model. Today, the enlarged horizon of Bulgarians, including the historical experience of the European countries, allow Bulgarians to understand the great difference between democracy and the other forms of management. There are problems, but the foundation, democracy as such, is not rejected. The third aspect I will say more about. This is one of the strongest changes in the last 10 years. Bulgarians in a range where they both want to be open to the world and want to be well protected, especially by carriers of foreign cultural practices. Compared with the last two waves, 2009 and 2018, a shift of focus from policies of openness to policies of identity. The nation is a European discovery, but Europe has also discovered globalization. Openness to the world and nationalism are two values between which Bulgarians waver. Openness, the attitude to our neighbors I have talked about. We can see these as an antipode to the regionalism. But this fifth wave this is the fourth wave, in fact. Bulgaria did not take part. Otherwise, it is the fifth wave. This wave that we did this year show this same tendency, the tendency to build a wall against the unfamiliar. We want to be in the big world, but the nostalgia for the small society, for the society with clear boundaries, the territory of the small locality is protected. Bulgarians feel decreasing solidarity for other people, only interested in the nearest local community. This new situation that was triggered by the migrant crisis opened the fear for a change of European and national identity. This is where the great debate is opened in Central Europe. What kind of Europe do we want? What does being citizens of our country mean, and being citizens of Europe? The answers to these questions are yet to be given. But for Bulgarians, the most important is respect for European cultural norms and respect for the national cultural institutions. And last but not least, values are all the more vivid and vital when they compensate for the shortages of the institutions. The norms of rational public life the so-called civilizational competency have changed. obeying the laws, privacy, duty to society. In 30 years, the people who reject of minor violations and to ranging all the way to more serious violations of laws, the rejection of this has grown in the last 30 years. But there is a very clear difference between the ideal and the facts. It does not mean that this behavior has not even perhaps grown in these years. But in terms of values, people reject values that do not allow them to control their life. A key dimension of the European way of life is that personal efforts and responsibility is at the basis of the individual's life. And this deepest layer of the feeling of having control over your life is slowly increasing in society. The number of people who feel they have control over their lives has consistently been growing in the last 30 years. This is not a full presentation of the data, but we should not forget something very important. Europe, as the great Spanish philosopher Ortega y Gasset said, that Bulgaria is not an inn, it is a road, and we have much to learn along this road. Dear guests, I want to turn to the journalists here, on whom much depends. The strategical, vital debate in Bulgarian society on Bulgarian values. This is a very difficult debate. Many things should be rethought. This is an endless task. We should proceed from the building of a new language, because when I said we Europeans, this does not mean loss of our national identity. We in Bulgaria are carriers of European values, and we must understand that regarding this question, the task is to be able to the image of Europe as a constellation of values, and that Europe may be able to go through the trials of time and to surmount the present crisis. We will face certain lack of understanding talking about strategic debate, but it is very necessary. We are combined here, journalists, intellectual scientists, people responsible for the political development of society. We have no one more to wait for. We are the ones who set the tasks. We have to want to make a big change. We have no one else to wait for. Especially with these studies, we should formulate problems that otherwise remain invisible. In these very brief comments, you have reached the conclusion that a little more than 60 minutes should not be a lost time, but has given you some intellectual satisfaction. Thank you very much. Looking at this public, this audience, I believe in a given case, you don't need to believe in the impossible. Thank you once again. We have a lot of work to do in order for the spiritual form of Europe to continue existing.